You've met someone for the first time. 30 seconds in, something feels off. They said nothing wrong. They were polite, perfectly normal. But something in you just knows. And you were right. Now flip it. You met someone else, felt completely safe, trusted them immediately, and they burned you. Same feeling, same certainty, completely opposite outcomes. So here's the question nobody actually answers. What is that feeling? Where does it come from? And how do you know in the moment whether it's about to save you or destroy you? 14 months. That's how long some of the world's most respected scientists spent investigating a single object. Electron microscopes, geologists, lawyers, mass spectrometry. Every test came back with the same answer. It's real. The Getty Museum paid nearly $10 million for it. Then the experts arrived, not scientists, sculpture experts, people who had spent their entire lives around ancient Greek art. The first one walked up to the statue, looked at it, and before anyone said a single word, "I'm sorry to hear that." 2 seconds. Nothing else. Another expert looked at the fingernails. Something felt wrong. He couldn't say what, just wrong. A third called it intuitive repulsion. They were all right. The statue was a forgery. 14 months of rigorous scientific analysis reached the wrong conclusion. 2 seconds of expert instinct reached the right one. That feeling you had about someone, the one that saved you, the one that burned you, it came from the exact same place as what those experts felt. So why did theirs work? And why does yours sometimes fail completely? That's the question. And by the end of this video, you'll have a real answer. Let me tell you what this video is not. This is not a video that tells you to trust your gut. You've heard that 1,000 times. Follow your instincts. Go with your first feeling. Deep down, you already know. That advice isn't wrong. It's just incomplete. And the part that's missing, that's where people get into serious trouble. This is also not a video about slowing down and thinking harder. You've heard that 1,000 times too. Here's what this actually is. By the end of this video, you're going to be able to answer one question. In real time, in any situation, is the snap judgment I'm having right now a finely tuned instrument? Or is it about to produce a confident, invisible, expensive mistake? Because the same 2-second judgment that spots a $10 million forgery also put one of the worst presidents in American history into the White House. Same speed, same certainty. The difference between the two isn't luck. It isn't personality. It's conditions. Specific, identifiable conditions you can actually learn to read. 8 ideas. By the end, the way you think about your own first impressions will be permanently different. Let's go. The adaptive unconscious. There is a part of your mind operating right now that you have zero conscious access to. It never stops. It processes enormous amounts of information simultaneously. And it doesn't communicate through logic or language. It communicates through feelings, hunches, the sudden certainty that something is wrong before you can say why. Malcolm Gladwell spent years researching exactly this. And what he found reshaped how scientists and psychologists think about human judgment. He called it the adaptive unconscious, not your emotions, not your subconscious in the therapy sense. A dedicated processing system that runs in parallel to everything you consciously think, reaching conclusions your rational mind hasn't even started forming yet. And here's what makes it fascinating. This system is ancient. It evolved long before language did, long before deliberate reasoning existed. It was built for speed because for most of human history, the cost of being slow was death. It is both the most powerful decision-making tool you possess and the most dangerous one. The question isn't whether to use it. You can't turn it off. It's already decided how you feel about this video. It already formed an opinion about the last person you met. It's running right now, underneath everything. The only question that matters is this. When is it working for you? And when is it working against you? 8 ideas. Each one answers a piece of that question. Let's start with the most surprising one. Idea 1, thin slicing. A researcher at Harvard took video clips of university teachers, 2 seconds long, silent, no audio, just the teacher moving around the room. She showed them to complete strangers, people who had never met these teachers, couldn't hear a word they said, knew nothing about them. She asked them to rate how effective each teacher was. Then she compared those ratings to students who had sat in those exact classes for an entire semester. They matched. 2 seconds of silent video versus a full semester of real experience. The same conclusion. Think about what that means for first impression you've ever formed. Every person you decided you liked before they finished their first sentence. Every room you walked into and immediately felt wrong. That wasn't superficial. That was your mind reading something real. Faster than your conscious mind could even register, there was something to read. Psychologists call this thin slicing, finding accurate patterns from the thinnest slice of experience. Now here's where it gets precise. John Gottman studies marriage. He can watch a couple have a conversation for 15 minutes about anything, even something mundane, and predict with over 90% accuracy whether they'll still be together 15 years later. Not 60%. 90. No history, no therapy records, just 15 minutes of watching them talk. How? He doesn't read everything equally. He trained his adaptive unconscious to track 4 specific signals and filter out the rest: contempt, defensiveness, stonewalling, criticism. Of those 4, contempt is the most lethal. Not anger, not frustration. Contempt, the micro-expression that says I am better than you, the eye roll, the dismissive tone. When Gottman sees contempt even briefly, even once, it predicts divorce with devastating accuracy. 15 minutes, 90%, because he knows exactly what to look for. That's the insight that reframes everything. Thin slicing isn't magic. It isn't a gift some people have and others don't. It's pattern recognition, built on genuine accumulated experience, compressed into a feeling that arrives in seconds. Gottman isn't psychic, he's pattern trained. The snap judgment isn't random, it's compressed expertise. But here's the word to hold on to: compressed. Because compression only works when there's something real to compress, and when there isn't, the feeling arrives exactly the same way. That's the next idea. Idea 2, the locked door. Here is the uncomfortable truth about everything we just covered. The adaptive unconscious doesn't explain itself. When it reaches a conclusion, when it hands you that feeling of certainty, that gut sense that something is right or wrong, it gives you nothing else. No reasoning, no evidence, no way to check the work, just the output. Psychologists call this the locked door. You get the answer. You never see how it got there. And here's what makes this dangerous. The feeling of certainty arrives identically, whether the judgment is brilliant or catastrophically wrong. There is no internal signal that fires when your adaptive unconscious is drawing on genuine expertise versus irrelevant noise. No warning light, no reduced confidence, no asterisk. You feel certain. You might be completely right, or you might be about to make the worst decision of your life. The feeling is the same. Think about what that means practically. 2 people walk into a job interview. One is genuinely exceptional, brilliant mind, quiet confidence, exactly what the role needs. The other is tall, well-spoken, physically commanding, and completely wrong for the position. The hiring manager feels a strong pull toward the second candidate. That pull feels like insight. It feels like pattern recognition. It feels like the kind of judgment that comes from years of experience reading people. It might be. Or it might be the adaptive unconscious pattern matching on surface signals, height, presence, the way someone fills a room, that have nothing to do with actual competence. From the inside, those 2 experiences are identical. This is what separates genuine intuition from sophisticated noise. Not the feeling, not the speed, not the confidence. The quality of what the adaptive unconscious has actually learned to read. The sculpture experts at the Getty felt certainty because their locked door was hiding decades of directly relevant experience with real ancient stone. The scientists who spent 14 months getting it wrong felt certainty too. Their locked door was hiding impeccable methodology applied to the wrong signals entirely. Same door, same feeling, completely different quality of judgment behind it. So the question is never, do I feel certain? You will always feel certain. That's how this system works. The question is, what has my adaptive unconscious actually learned to read in this specific domain? because the next idea shows exactly what happens when the answer to that question is the wrong things entirely. Idea 3, the Warren Harding error. Warren Harding was elected President of the United States in 1920 in one of the largest landslides in American history. He was also, by nearly every historical measure, one of the worst presidents America ever had. Passive, ineffective, possibly corrupt. Historians consistently rank him at the very bottom. So how did he get elected? He looked extraordinary. Tall, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, a voice that filled a room, the complete physical image of what a president should look like. People took one look at Warren Harding, and something fired instantly in their adaptive unconscious. That man should lead. No evidence, no record, no demonstrated competence. Just the overwhelming activation of every surface signal we've unconsciously learned to associate with authority and power. This is called the Warren Harding error, when the adaptive unconscious isn't drawing on genuine expertise. It's pattern matching on irrelevant signals that feel like evidence. And the research on this is deeply uncomfortable. Studies consistently show that taller people earn significantly more money than shorter people, not because height produces competence, but because it unconsciously activates associations with leadership that have nothing to do with actual performance. CEOs of major companies are on average significantly taller than the general population. Think about that. The adaptive unconscious is literally influencing who runs the world's largest organizations, based on inches. But it goes further than height. Psychologists developed something called the implicit association test, a tool that measures unconscious associations between categories, race, gender, age, and attributes like intelligence, competence, danger. The results are confronting. Most people, including people who hold genuinely progressive values, including people who have dedicated their careers to equality, carry unconscious associations that directly contradict what they consciously believe. When researchers administer this test, the gap between what people think they believe and what their adaptive unconscious actually does is consistent, measurable, and significant. This isn't about being a good or bad person. The adaptive unconscious was shaped by the environment you absorbed, the media, the culture, the patterns of representation you were exposed to long before you had the vocabulary to question any of it. It learned what it learned, without your permission, without your awareness. And it applies that learning with complete confidence in hiring decisions, in who gets trusted, in who gets the benefit of the doubt, whether it's relevant or not. Here is the Warren Harding lesson in one sentence. The snap judgment draws on everything the mind has absorbed, including the biases it never consciously chose and would consciously reject. The feeling of insight is identical whether your adaptive unconscious is reading genuine signal or reflecting the world's noise back at you as truth. Which means the next question isn't just what has my gut learned, it's what has it learned from? Idea 4, the Van Riper principle. In 2002, the United States military ran the largest and most expensive war game ever conducted. They called it Millennium Challenge. The blue team, the American force, had everything: real-time satellite surveillance, billions of dollars of analytical infrastructure, a command information system so comprehensive it was designed to eliminate uncertainty entirely. Their entire strategy was built on one belief: more information produces better decisions. On the other side was Paul Van Riper, a retired Marine general in his 60s brought in to lead the opposing force, a rogue state in the Persian Gulf, massively outgunned, massively out-resourced. What Van Riper had was decades of real combat experience and a deep understanding of how to operate in chaos. He didn't wait for complete information. He made decisions in seconds. He communicated through motorcycle messengers and light signals from rooftops to avoid electronic detection. He acted before the blue team had finished reading their first situation report. In the first day of the exercise, Van Riper sank the entire blue team fleet. 16 ships. Gone. If this had been real, 20,000 sailors would have died. The most sophisticated analytical system ever built lost completely to a commander operating almost entirely on instinct and experience. Now here's what this is actually about. Because it's not simply instinct beats analysis. It's about the cost of time. The blue team wasn't wrong to want information. Information matters. Analysis matters. The problem was that their process for converting information into decisions was so layered, so deliberate, so dependent on complete data, that by the time they were ready to act, the moment had already passed. Van Riper understood something the blue team didn't. In fast-moving, high-stakes situations, a good decision made now consistently beats a perfect decision made too late. His adaptive unconscious, trained by decades of real command experience, could compress a complex situation into a decisive action in seconds. Not because he was skipping steps, because his experience had already done the analytical work, years before this moment. The lesson isn't to stop thinking. It's to understand that in certain conditions, speed, complexity, rapidly changing circumstances, the mind that acts decisively on thin slices outperforms the mind waiting for the complete picture. More information, processed too slowly, can be just as fatal as too little information. But, and this is critical, Van Riper's snap judgment worked because it was built on the right foundation. What happens when the same speed and decisiveness gets applied under the wrong conditions? That's the next idea, and it's the darkest one. Idea 5, when snap judgments fail, February 4th, 1999, the Bronx, New York. Just after midnight, Amadou Diallo, a 22-year-old immigrant, is standing in the vestibule of his own apartment building, doing nothing wrong, just standing there. 4 plainclothes officers in an unmarked car notice him. Something activates. They stop. They get out. They approach. Diallo reaches into his pocket. They fire 41 shots. He was unarmed. He was reaching for his wallet. The officers were not malicious. They were not reckless. They were experienced, trained professionals who made a catastrophic snap judgment error in under 2 seconds. And they had no idea, in that moment, that their judgment system had already failed before they pulled a single trigger. Here's what was happening inside their bodies. When threat perception spikes, when a situation feels dangerous, heart rate climbs rapidly. Above a certain threshold, something significant happens to the adaptive unconscious. Peripheral vision narrows, time distorts, complex motor skills deteriorate, and most critically, the ability to read social and emotional signals collapses entirely. The part of the brain responsible for interpreting facial expressions, reading intention, processing nuance, it goes offline. What's left is a system locked into a single mode: threat, respond, survive. Psychologists call this temporary autism. Under extreme physiological stress, the adaptive unconscious loses its ability to read another human being accurately. The officers weren't reading Amadou Diallo anymore. They were running a threat response in a system so flooded it could only see danger in every movement, every shadow, every hand reaching into every pocket. Now, here is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. The conditions that broke their judgment: urgency, high stakes, extreme time pressure, the feeling that everything depends on the next 2 seconds. Those are precisely the conditions where people feel most justified trusting their snap judgment. I had to act. There was no time to think. I went with my gut. But that's exactly when the gut performs worst. Stress doesn't sharpen the adaptive unconscious. It dismantles it, quietly, completely, without telling you. Van Riper succeeded because despite the complexity of his situation, he wasn't physiologically overwhelmed. His system was activated, not flooded. That distinction, activated versus flooded, is everything. The adaptive unconscious performs brilliantly under pressure. It fails catastrophically under panic. And from the inside, those two states are very easy to confuse. Which means before any important snap judgment, the first thing you need to read isn't the situation, it's yourself. Idea 6. The problem with asking why. Researchers ran a simple experiment. They asked people to taste different varieties of jam and rank them from best to worst. No analysis, no criteria, just taste and decide. Their rankings closely matched the rankings of professional food experts. The adaptive unconscious, operating without interference, knew good jam. Then they ran it again, same jams, same people. But this time they asked participants to write down why they preferred what they preferred. Describe their reasoning, articulate their choices. After explaining their preferences, the rankings collapsed. People who had accurately identified the better jams could no longer do it reliably. Their ratings diverged significantly from expert consensus. The act of introspection hadn't clarified their judgment, it had destroyed it. This is called verbal overshadowing, and it appears everywhere once you know to look for it. Eyewitness testimony, one of the most consequential domains in the entire legal system. People who are asked to verbally describe a suspect's face before viewing a lineup are significantly worse at identifying the correct person than people who aren't asked to describe it first. Think about what that means. The legal system, trying to extract the most accurate identification possible, routinely uses a process that actively degrades the accuracy of the very thing it's trying to measure. Why does this happen? Two systems, running in parallel. The visual recognition system, the one that identifies faces, reads rooms, knows good jam, operates through pattern recognition. It doesn't use language. It doesn't think in words. The verbal analytical system operates entirely in language, concepts, categories, explanations. When you force the verbal system to describe what the visual system does, the verbal system doesn't translate accurately. It interferes. It overwrites the original signal with a cruder, language-based approximation. And once that happens, the original signal is gone. Now think about how often this plays out in real decisions. The job interview debrief. Tell me why you like this candidate. The design review. Explain what isn't working. The relationship conversation. Why do you feel that way? All of them well-intentioned. All of them potentially dismantling the very judgment they're trying to validate. This doesn't mean stop asking why. It means understand what asking why actually does. Some knowledge cannot survive articulation. Demanding an explanation doesn't always reveal the truth behind a judgment. Sometimes it simply replaces it. The adaptive unconscious knows things it cannot say. The question is whether you give it the conditions to operate honestly, which is exactly what the next idea is about. Idea 7, the right conditions. Blind auditions. For most of the 20th century, American symphony orchestras had a problem. Women were dramatically underrepresented. Not in music schools. Women studied at the same rates as men. Not in skill. Female musicians performed at elite levels consistently. But when it came to professional orchestras, the positions went overwhelmingly to men. Conductors and selection committees were genuinely confused by this. Many of them were women themselves. They believed sincerely that they were selecting purely on musical merit. They weren't wrong about their intentions. They were wrong about what their adaptive unconscious was actually reading. Then orchestras introduced something simple, a screen, a physical curtain between the auditioning musician and the judges. The judges could hear everything. They could not see who was playing. The percentage of women hired increased dramatically and immediately. Same judges, same musicians, same music. One variable changed, what the adaptive unconscious was allowed to see. This is the most important experiment in the entire video, because it doesn't just illustrate the problem, it shows you the solution. The snap judgment didn't slow down. The judges weren't asked to deliberate longer or analyze more carefully. They still formed instant impressions. Within seconds of hearing the first notes, the screen worked not by changing the speed of judgment. It worked by changing the quality of what the judgment was reading. Remove the irrelevant visual signal, gender, appearance, the unconscious associations that fire the moment a woman walks onto a stage, and the adaptive unconscious could do what it was actually built to do. Evaluate music. Think about where this applies in your own life. Every domain where you make recurring judgments about people, hiring, investing, trusting, choosing, ask one question. What signals is my adaptive unconscious actually reading right now? Are they genuinely predictive of what you care about? Competence, reliability, quality, character? Or are they surface signals that feel relevant, appearance, confidence, familiarity, the way someone reminds you of someone you already trust? The blind audition works because it separates signal from noise before the judgment forms. You can do the same thing deliberately. Evaluate the work before you meet the person. Read the proposal before you see who wrote it. Assess the decision before you know who's advocating for it, not to slow down your judgment, to clean up what it's reading. The adaptive unconscious is not the problem. The conditions under which it operates, that's the whole game. And that brings us to the final idea, the one that ties everything together. Idea 8, when to trust it and when to question it. We've covered a lot of ground. Expert intuition that beats 14 months of science, unconscious bias electing the wrong president, a war game won by instinct, stress dismantling judgment at the worst possible moment, introspection destroying the very thing it tries to understand. Now we put it together into something actually usable, because the goal was never to make you distrust your snap judgment. And it was never to make you trust it blindly either. The goal is precision, knowing, with some reliability, which version you're dealing with in any given moment. Here's the framework. Trust your snap judgment when the domain matches genuine accumulated experience, not adjacent experience, not general confidence, specific, directly relevant pattern recognition built over time in this domain. Gottman's predictions work because he's analyzed thousands of real couples. The sculpture experts worked because they'd spent decades with real ancient stone. Van Riper worked because he'd spent a career making real decisions under real pressure. Remove the genuine experience, and you don't have intuition anymore. You have assumption wearing intuition's clothes. The environment is calm enough for the system to function clearly. Activated is fine, flooded is not. If your body is overwhelmed, the signal is compromised before it reaches you. The signals being read are genuinely relevant. Music at a blind audition, contempt in a marriage conversation, the specific texture of ancient stone. Question your snap judgment when you're in an unfamiliar domain. The Getty scientists were exceptional at what they did, but they were reading documents about a statue, not the statue itself. Expertise in one domain does not transfer automatically to another. Stress is high, heart rate elevated, time pressure extreme. These are the exact conditions that feel like they demand fast, decisive judgment, and the exact conditions where fast, decisive judgment fails most completely. The signal feels powerful, but may be irrelevant. Height, physical presence, confident eye contact, similarity to someone you already trust. These fire the adaptive unconscious intensely. They feel like signal. They are almost always noise. Here is the uncomfortable truth that sits underneath all 8 ideas. The feeling of certainty is constant. It doesn't rise when you're right and fall when you're wrong. It doesn't distinguish between compressed expertise and compressed bias. It arrives with the same weight, the same authority, the same sense of I know this, regardless of what's actually behind it. Which means the single most important skill isn't better intuition. It isn't more rigorous analysis either. It's self-knowledge, an honest, accurate understanding of which domains your adaptive unconscious has genuinely earned the right to be trusted in. The Getty experts who spotted the forgery in 2 seconds had that self-knowledge implicitly. Decades of the right experience in exactly the right domain. The scientists who spent 14 months getting it wrong were operating with complete confidence outside the domain where their expertise actually applied. Same certainty, completely different foundations. That's the whole game. Not fast thinking versus slow thinking, not gut versus analysis. Known foundation versus unknown foundation. And the moment you start asking, what has my adaptive unconscious actually learned to read here? And under what conditions? You've moved from being someone who reacts to their snap judgments to someone who understands them. That's the difference this video was always building toward. Let me pull all of this together. 8 ideas, 1 thread. Thin slicing. The adaptive unconscious can compress genuine expertise into a 2-second judgment, but only when the expertise is real and relevant. The locked door. The feeling of certainty reveals nothing about whether the judgment is correct. You get the output. You never see the work. The Warren Harding error. The same system that reads genuine signal also absorbs irrelevant noise, appearance, bias, surface impressions, and applies it with identical confidence. Van Riper. In fast-moving situations, decisive action from a trained unconscious defeats sophisticated analysis, because the cost of slowness itself becomes fatal. The Diallo case. Extreme stress dismantles the adaptive unconscious completely, turns a judgment system into a threat response at the exact moment you trust it most. Verbal overshadowing. Forcing an intuitive judgment to explain itself doesn't validate it. Some knowledge cannot survive articulation. The blind audition. You can deliberately change what the adaptive unconscious is allowed to read. Remove the irrelevant signal. The judgment doesn't slow down, it cleans up. When to trust it. Genuine domain experience, calm conditions, relevant signals. When to question it. Unfamiliar territory, high stress, powerful signals that may be noise. One sentence holds all 8 together. The adaptive unconscious is a pattern recognition system of extraordinary power that is only as good as the patterns it has learned to read. Not trust your gut, not think more carefully. Understand what your gut has actually learned, and understand the conditions under which it's operating honestly. Now here's the connection I want you to hold on to. The previous video on this channel was about how the slow, deliberate mind makes mistakes, how it mistakes coherence for truth, how a story that fits together feels identical to a story that's actually correct. This video is the mirror image. The slow mind mistakes coherence for truth. The fast mind mistakes familiarity for accuracy. Two different systems, the same fundamental failure mode, both generating feelings of certainty that have no necessary connection to whether they are actually correct. Neither system knows when it's failing. The slow mind doesn't flag its own coherence bias. The fast mind doesn't flag its own noise. Both hand you certainty and leave you to figure out the rest, which is exactly why understanding the conditions for both systems is the only thing that actually helps. That's what this channel is built around. Not just what the research says, but what you can do with it in real decisions, in real time. Listening is good, but action is better. So as we wrap up, here are the 3 most actionable ideas. 1. The domain check before acting on any gut feeling. Ask one question. Have I actually earned the right to trust my instinct here? Genuine experience in this specific domain? Yes, trust it. First time in this territory, treat it as a guess, not a judgment. 2. The stress check. Before any high-stakes decision, pause 3 seconds. Notice your body. Focused and alert. Your system is working. Go. Heart racing, tunnel vision, time pressure screaming, your system is broken. Wait. The louder the urgency feels, the more dangerous it is to obey it. 3. Clean the signal. Ask yourself, what am I actually reading right now? The work, the track record, the evidence, or the presentation, the confidence, the feeling in the room. One is signal, one is noise. Your adaptive unconscious cannot tell the difference unless you give it the right conditions. Remove what doesn't belong. Let it read what actually matters. The snap judgment doesn't fail because you weren't careful enough. It fails in predictable ways because it was built for speed, not accuracy. For recognition, not truth. You can't rewire the system, but you can learn to read the conditions before certainty takes over. That moment of awareness, between the feeling and the decision, that's where everything changes. Which of these ideas landed hardest for you? Drop it below. If this is the kind of thinking you want more of, subscribe. New videos every week. No motivation, no fluff, just clarity. And if you want to go deeper, click the left to see how these same patterns get used on you in influence, persuasion, and every room where power is quietly shifting. Click the right to see how they play out in the decisions that shape your financial life. Same blind spots, much higher stakes. Choose your next step. I'll see you there.